Thank you. Glad to be here.
This is Jenna Zark. She's joined us today. She's a columnist, lyricist, playwright, and she's also a published author. Her book came out in 2015. It's called The Beat on Ruby Street. And she's with the same publisher I'm with now as Dragon Meaning Press. Can you tell us a little bit about The Beat on Ruby Street?
It's about a young girl, and she's about to turn 12, and she's growing up in a family in the Beat Generation era in 1958 in New York. And she gets arrested or taken to the police station, not really arrested, on her way to see a very famous poet named Jack Kerouac read.
Love Jack.
And all sorts of terrible things happen, but she ends up really discovering a lot about herself and her world.
Yeah, sounds cool. So what kind of inspired it?
I think that when I was younger, my sister took me to Greenwich Village. We lived in New Jersey, to see a play. And I had never seen Greenwich Village. I thought it was really fascinating. And it was much later than the Beat era, but it was such an interesting place and so full of artistic life that I got very fascinated with it. Started to learn about the history, and then kind of fell on this idea. I had also read a picture book when I was, I don't know, maybe 9, about a little girl. And this was a picture book growing up in a family of beats. But it was very funny. And I thought, what would happen if that little girl grew up and she was 11? And what would that story be? And then, so I started making that up. And I also had a friend in high school who actually ran away from her family. And that was kind of serious.
Yeah.
And we couldn't find her for for maybe 2 weeks. But what happened that was kind of wonderful was she met an artist named Gary Tabita. And I never met this guy, but he took care of her. He helped her. He got her to call her parents. And he kind of took care of her until she was ready to go home. And in honor of him, I named one of the characters Gary Tabita.
Oh, that's cool.
And the way she described him, he was really, an amazing guy.
Yeah.
And so that also made its way into the book a little bit.
Oh, that's neat. It's pretty cool. I love hearing what came behind people's inspirations and what they.
Yeah.
It's different from what I write. It's very different. Yeah, that's really neat. Okay, so Jenna's joined us today to talk about young adult and why kind of perceptions around adults reading young adult. It's become more prevalent, I think. There was an article I read that said in 2000, it was a study in 2012 that said 55% of young adult readers are actually adults, which is the majority at this point. So kind of talk about that, and I think there was an article in Slate, I think it was in 2014, by a columnist named Ruth Graham, and she talked very much against adults reading young adult and said that we should be embarrassed. And we're disagreeing on that. Do you disagree as well?
So you're saying you agree with her?
I disagree. We disagree.
No, disagree.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're here to disagree during this episode.
Yes.
She's wrong.
Yes, I disagree also. I feel that I read the article. I did not read the book she was talking about. But what it sounded to me like was that she had read a couple of novels. They were mostly sounding like they were in the romance genre, which if you read that genre in adult novels, you get a lot of the same feelings she was talking about, I think.
That's a good point, yeah.
That I don't think it was fair to so much young adult literature.
Oh, no.
I remember reading my first young adult book in recent years was called The Beet Fields by Gary Paulson.
Oh, Gary Paulson, yeah.
It's not at all sentimental,
Yeah.
not even slightly. And it's about a 16-year-old who kind of is on his own, and he joins a migrant camp, and his life it's not sentimentalized, it's beautifully written.
Yeah.
It's a short novel, so it may not be long as an adult novel, but I think it was certainly not anything she was describing.
Oh, not at all. Like we both enjoy the fantasy, young adult. We like the escapism, but when you talk about, like, when we're talking about stuff like this, like I don't know if you ever read the book Holes. They made it into like a movie.
Yes, yeah.
And there's like tons of symbolism in that movie,
Yep.
religious undertones, and there's just so much there. I mean, I wrote a whole paper on it when I was in college, and that's middle grade, and it's so much deeper than this woman was giving these books credit for, and not that there has to be more depth, because if it's just your preference to read,
Right.
Yeah, like, well, who cares? Let that person read. They're reading, you know. But
Right.
yeah, there's just so much more depth to stuff like The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Well, there's a lot of adult themes.
Yeah, there's a lot of adult themes, and
And I don't know if it's just because I'm older that I'm becoming more aware of them, or if it's that the way young adult and those types of genres are being written. But there's very adult themes leaked throughout the entire book these days, I feel like. Especially with a lot of the mainstream stuff, too.
I agree. I think authors have broken the rules, they've broken the barrier, and I've seen very little. I had a friend who recently said to me, don't you think young adult books are pretty much with adult themes now, but they have younger characters?
It's like, that's the only defining feature.
Yeah.
And I so agree with that. And the other thing that I wanted to take issue with was she was saying, or she was implying to me in her article, that if you were reading a young adult book, you weren't going to read an adult book. And I think that's completely off the mark.
Yeah.
I remember being in high school and reading adult books. I remember reading The Idiot. I was 17.
Yeah.
I was astonished by it. But also reading young adult books. I didn't need to exchange one for the other. It depended on what kind of story I was looking for.
Yeah, what you were looking for. I know I read, like, everything when I was a teenager. There was young adult and there was adult, and I didn't really make a distinction between them. I was just looking for certain stories.
Exactly.
Now there's such a distinction, you know. It's like this is YA, and yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, that kind of reminds me of was it Maggie Stiefwater? Am I saying it right? She wrote The Raven Boys. She wrote some other stuff. I think I actually read a couple of her books, but she said that, and she's considered YA, and she said that it's a bullshit genre, like label. It's just a bullshit label, and I kind of agree, because
I think it meant something 15 years ago, but I don't really feel it means what it used to mean.
Yeah.
Because the YA books I read when I was 13, I feel were a little bit more
Watered down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were trying to make them age appropriate.
Yeah.
Where these days they're not.
Yeah.
They're racier, definitely.
They're very racier.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you both, and I think it's interesting. Would there be anything that you would shy away from if you were either writing a YA book or recommending it to a teenager? You know, for example, if there were, I don't know, explicit sex scenes or something like that, would you, or a very explicit violence, would there be something that you would draw the line at for a teenage reader that you might not for an adult reader?
Well, it's interesting because for myself, okay, I'll give an example. I read The Duff recently, and I loved it as an adult. I thought it was a great read, but it was really sexual, and I was actually really surprised. I was reading it, and I was like, holy crow, this is, and I think if I had a 13-year-old daughter, I might be a little hesitant for her to read it, because it does kind of promote an open sexuality with teens at such a young age. Granted, there were a lot of adult themes, and the teenagers were dealing with a lot of emotional baggage in their lives. It still was a little relaxed about the sex at that age. Which is funny, because my mother always was okay with me watching the sex scenes, but I couldn't watch the violence.
I feel the same way I don't promote it, here, watch sex scenes, but if it's sex versus violence, I would say sex over violence.
Because she always said, sex and intimacy was more natural, where violence was, in her opinion, not so natural.
Yeah.
And it was
violence.
So it's funny that at this point, I don't know, I guess I'm personally a little more open to the violence than I am the sex.
And movies are a little different than books.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Because it's so visual.
Yeah. I noticed, just as an aside, reading, looking at Game of Thrones and, watching some of it and how explicit it is, and that is a different experience than reading the books. The books are still violent and sexual, but somehow seeing it is much more visceral of an experience.
Yeah. It was just I just had a thought, and I totally lost it. It was about what we were talking about books. Oh, you know what I was going to say when you were asking the question about young adult? I know that personally, when I was writing my young adult paranormal novel, that I very thoughtfully did keep sex out of it, and minimal swearing, minimal cursing and stuff, and I would go through and be like, oh, there's a lot of cursing in here, and I would take it out, which is, I've read plenty of young adult nowadays, and there's tons of that. This book over here is Marked. It's a whole series by PC and Kristen Cass. It's a vampire series. I mean, there is innuendos. They don't actually have, they don't have graphic scenes, but there's innuendos of blowjobs and sex in them with the teenagers, and I was like, this is crazy when I was reading it, because I guess I hadn't realized how much young adult had changed. But for me, when I was writing mine, even though I kind of would still say to a teenager, 15 and up, because there's a lot of, there's death in it, that I just personally can't, I kept it out. And then I have my first book that I read, or that I wrote, it kind of got slotted into YA, even though I never meant it for YA, and there's a sex scene in it, and that's why, I was at a book signing, and I had a guy with a 13-year-old daughter asking, and who wanted to buy it, and he said, well, what do you think? And I said, there is sex in it, and he was like, well, she reads lots of stuff, she's a mature reader, and I'm like, yeah, I understand that, I was too, and I read tons of stuff. I think I read Gerald's Game by Stephen King when I was 13, and so this is nothing compared to that, but I was still I don't know. I don't want to say, yeah, here, take it, It just felt like I don't want to promote it. If you feel comfortable, go ahead and let your kid read it, but, I'm not going to promote it.
Yeah. It's interesting because, my book is really, I think of it as definitely for 11 and up, maybe 10 and up, and I don't have sexual I don't have anything explicit in there or language, although the themes are somewhat adult, about a young girl growing up, where her parents divorce and different things happen. And I've noticed some of the reviews will say, wouldn't recommend for 10, would recommend 11 or 12 and up. It's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
How people feel about their kids, what your editors say, and so it's an interesting thing to say, well, are there points where we say, there is a difference between what I'm writing. I know there is a difference between middle school and what I write for adults.
Definitely.
YA crosses, kind of fudges some of those boundaries. And I think a 17-year-old reader is going to be very, very different than a 13-year-old reader.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And yeah, middle grade, there's definitely, I think, a distinction with middle grade between, even older young adult. That middle grade, there should be no sex. There shouldn't be that stuff. It's very,
you have more of a definite boundary.
Yeah. And then you have the older young adult, this stuff, some of the stuff here, like Hunger Games and, all that stuff. And it kind of crosses the lines between what, the new, it's like a newer genre, new adult, kind of crossing those lines where the ages.
Which I feel is the only distinction is the age of the characters.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And yeah, I don't know.
The themes are just as dark and deep in both of them.
Yeah. Hunger Games is very dark.
Yeah.
The whole series.
Yeah.
Very dark. And so is Divergence again.
So I didn't read it, but I did see the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is dark, too.
So maybe we could talk about why we personally like young adult.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why do you like it?
Well, I think that there are, I'm not going to like every young adult book, just like I'm not going to like every adult book. There are certain ones that I've read. I really started ramping up reading about reading YA and middle school work when I felt like that was what I wanted to write. Right. So I wanted to, and I was really pleasantly surprised to see how good it was, how many wonderful authors there were, middle grade and YA. And I made a little list here if I can find it, but The Beat Fields was definitely one of them. There was a story called Stoughton by Chris Crutcher, really touching on, physical abuse that one character was going through. There's a very interesting author called Jack Gantos that writes a lot about, he wrote about a boy, Joey Pizza, I don't know how you pronounce it, Pizza, loses control, but about ADD.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He also, though, wrote a very interesting book about, I think it was a year that he spent in prison.
Oh, wow.
Because of a drug charge. Now, that would definitely be for an older
YA
reader, probably also adults. But I did know a young man that unfortunately got into juvenile prison and gave him that book. And I think he was close to 17. And he said he loved that book. And he told his mom, thank her for getting it to me. It is, it isn't light reading, but I thought it was really strongly written and fascinating, and certainly a cautionary tale, and a lot about a young man who takes a wrong turn and what that means for him, and how he kind of finds his way out by being a writer. And I think art can save us. I also had, I was lucky. At one time I was editing some books for Scholastic, And that was when I read Fever Crumb. I don't know if you guys, it's a wonderful sci-fi book, which I don't even usually read. And I know the author, but I'm blanking on the author's name right now. But it's the Fever Crumb series. It's incredible. It's an incredible, incredible book.
See, I have a 5-year-old, so I'm taking note on books for him as he gets older. He loves stories. He's very imaginative.
Yeah. Oh, great. What does he like to read?
He loves, well, I mean, he has all, right now, it's just, he loves different stories, but he really likes funny things. Like anything that makes him laugh is a keeper, a book that he'll want to read a million times. We have one that I think, actually, because he was in a pre-K this year, we had the Scholastic orders coming in, and so we got a bunch of books from there, but we had one that was, I wish I could remember what it was. It's about it's like the 3 Little Pigs story, but it's like 3 little aliens.
Oh, okay.
It's really cute. There's just so many things. If he makes
nice.
laugh, he likes them, yeah.
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 Yeah, I had a hard time getting my son to read, but then there were some books that really resonated, and we started, I insisted that we read The Sword and the Stone.
Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
And that was, when he was actually pretty young.
Really? Yeah.
Like 7.
I loved that story when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love getting him my stuff,
Yeah. I love that book. And then, I hoped he would carry it through. But he ended up liking a lot of books about World War II.
Oh. Like history.
Yeah. So he liked a lot of historical novels.
Oh, yeah.
So
think about it, The Sword and the Stone. It's kind of a King Arthur type thing. So you kind of, maybe you inspired it.
Well, he used to tease me because I guess Madame Mim in that book was, she was a beautiful witch but very evil, and she ate children. So he would do a lot of silly things, say things that would freak me out at parties and things. So he would say, "Mom, you remind me of Madame Mim." And I thought, oh God, if anyone is reading this. And he would say it because the picture he thought looked like me, but that was
It wasn't.
So I tried to get him to stop that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
No Madame Mim, no.
No, you don't probably do. Oh, that's cute. Yeah, I have it's right here. I have an illustrated Harry Potter, which I tried. Not yet. We're not. He's seen a couple of the movies, but he's not there with the book yet. He needs more pictures, and it's long, so. At this point.
Yeah. And how many adults read Harry Potter?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So many. In fact, I didn't read it until you took me to the movie, like, so many years ago, and I was like, this is awesome, I'm going to go read all the books, and then I did, and they were just, they're awesome.
Well, it's like the Twilight.
The world building itself is just...
obsession, though. How many mothers became huge fans of Twilight?
Yeah.
It became a mother-daughter phenomenon.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, I feel that being an adult and reading YA has become more acceptable in the last 10 years, 15 years. So this is my question, have you ever felt ashamed reading YA in public or anything?
I don't.
Yeah, that's
because I just feel like this is, like with the beet fields, this is such a great book. And if you look over and you're looking at what I'm looking at and how beautiful this writing is, you are not, no, I have nothing to be embarrassed about. And what was the other book I was looking at? The Golden Compass.
Oh, I love that series, yeah.
And I thought, he's got a lot of stuff going on here.
Oh, yeah, so many Christian...
about God and about, all the themes that are washing around in there.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if it's a good book, I basically don't care if it's written for someone for YA, for a teenager, for an adult, I just want a good book.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel like some of my actual YA book, I feel like the most people that have probably read it have been like adult women that read it. Like,
yeah, and I've seen that too, even with my middle grade book, that I have kids that read it and they really like it and they tell me so, and I love that.
Yeah.
But also their parents will read it.
Yeah.
They'll like it.
Yeah.
And that tells me that you can write on both levels. You can reach both audiences.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't preclude you, even from being a teenager, 15, 14, 13, and reading an adult book. Or Mark Twain. There's my favorite Mark Twain book is called The Mysterious Stranger.
I've never read that one.
Oh, you have to read it.
Is it really good?
I want everyone to read it. And it is about a young man who comes to a medieval town in the Middle Ages, and his name is Satan. And he comes to live in this town and interacts with 3 young boys. They're all, I think they're 10 or 11. It's really a story about God, about our notions about God and Satan and humanity. And but it's Mark Twain.
That sounds really interesting. I am going to read it now.
I'm going to look it up.
It's told
definitely
so spectacularly. And he also does something with like preordination, the idea of preordained. And this young boy dies, I don't want to spoil it, but they spend a lot of the novel trying to keep that from happening. And, whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, then there's a whole other story going on. But it's an extraordinary story. I read it, I might have been 15, 14. I would read it now again if I had never read it. It's superb.
Yeah.
It works on both levels.
See, two of my favorite books from my childhood are definitely like The Secret Garden and The Little Princess.
Great books.
I read like A Secret Garden like a year ago. Like, I have a nice copy, and my mom got me for Christmas, and I reread it because it's such a beautiful story. But do you ever read Madeleine L'Engle?
I have, yes.
And her books are kind of like that. They deal with so many different themes. There's, just kind of futuristic possibilities, religion. Her books are very deep and thematic, and they were written, in the 70s for, kids, but I love them to this day. They're some of my favorite books. Have you read some of hers?
I think when I was younger, I may have read one.
Yeah.
But I don't remember.
Yeah, she's still one of my favorite authors. Like, on the flip side, there's young adult authors who are just, generally young adult authors, but then they turn around and write something very adult. And one of my favorite books is Summer Sisters by Judy Blume.
And I hadn't read that, so I'd be curious what you think.
It's very good. It's one of my favorites. It's actually, but it's not a kid's book. It's It's for adults, and it's a beautiful story, and I always loved it. I mean, you can be a teenager and probably read it, but it was definitely for upwards. It wasn't for her usual audience, which was much younger kids, So, yeah.
And I remember there's the famous author Isaac Bashevis Singer, who wrote a lot of very adult stories, Jewish subjects, but and then loved writing for children too. And I think he said something like, that children could apprehend stories better than adults because they didn't have so many filters about what they believed or didn't believe. So he felt like he could talk with them more directly. And he wrote adult, very adult themes for adults too.
I feel like I took a whole class in college that was young adult lit, and all we did was take, like, most of them were actually middle grade books, and some of them were older, but older teens, but a lot of them were middle grades, and like dissect all the symbolism and all the themes that are within them. That there's so much depth throughout it all.
And as a writer, when you're having a conversation with your editor about your book, and maybe the editor is giving you some suggestions, do you feel like, oh, this is young adults? I mean, I don't. I feel like we're talking about the book and story and character and how to get there.
Yeah, I never even, when I first wrote my first book, I never set out to reach any audience except anybody that liked fantasy. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, I just love fantasy. I'm writing this adventure fantasy book, and I hope that, whoever likes fantasy may pick it up and read it. And I wasn't age trying to narrow it down to one, age or part of the population. It was just supposed to be for everybody. So, and it was like, you have to decide, is it this or this? I'm like, what? I don't want to.
You don't?
Yeah. Fantasy. Have fun.
I'm gonna go out and get your book tonight.
Oh. Well, my one, the first one I wrote is out of print because I am re-editing it before I submit it. But my other one, The Reaper's Daughter, that one is with Dragon Moon Press, and that's my YA one. That one I specifically was like, okay, I'm going to write this for a YA audience. But, I tend to not like to have to narrow when I'm writing, I just want to write.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any other thoughts? I think we went through most of our bullet points on what we really wanted to talk about.
Yeah. I was also going to mention another book, Karen Hess, who is, because I thought, gosh, I've named a lot of male authors tonight. Not, that gender really matters at all, but there are also such extraordinary women authors. But she wrote a book about a nuclear accident, too, Phoenix Rising, that's very adult themes, very well written.
I think I've heard of that. I don't think I have.
It's called Phoenix Rising, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that, but I haven't read it.
Yeah. And even the book Hugo, which is primarily a visual story, a picture book, has a very adult layer.
You made a movie on that one, Hugo?
Yes. Yeah, there was.
Yeah. I was just looking to see you had mentioned The Lovely Bones.
Yes.
Which I've read, yeah.
And now I was wondering, do you guys think of that as a young adult book or an adult book?
Did you read it?
No, but I did see the movie. And if the movie was anything like the book.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it was very about a young adult in a lot
of told from the point of view of beyond the grave.
Mm-hmm.
I think, 17, 16.
Yeah. Because the part, where she dies is pretty gruesome.
Yeah. And it was a very disturbing.
Yeah, the whole thing, I still, think of that book because I think I read it in a day and was like, oh my gosh. It's just...
But what's interesting, if you think about it, this happened to a child in the book, and how many children, very unfortunately, go through this. So reading that book for them, for survivors, might resonate quite a bit.
Or even as a parent, trying to protect your child, and you read this, and it might make you, more deeply think about, strangers, and how do you protect your child from these sort of abductions and...
Yeah.
I know I do. I always think about it.
Yep, me too. Yeah.
So, definitely, I don't agree with Ruth Graham's article.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty united on that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
This was amazing talking to you. I loved hearing your insights.
Thank you.
You have a good night.
You too.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.